So we continue our series on 1 Samuel. We've been watching the whole great saga of the ark as it's moved around, as it's been abused and misused, and in so doing, both the Israelites and the Philistines seem to have dishonored God. But now it's finally settled in Kiriath-Jearim, and it's being treated with the kind of honor and respect that's due to God, that it symbolizes His presence. So I'll be reading from the English Standard Version, chapter 7 of 1 Samuel. The men of Kiriath-Jearim came and took up the ark of the Lord and brought it to the house of Abinadab on the hill. And they consecrated his son Eleazar to have charge of the ark of the Lord. From the day that the ark was lodged at Kiriath-Jearim, a long time passed, some 20 years. And all the house of Israel lamented after the Lord. And Samuel said to all the house of Israel, "If you are returning to the Lord with all your heart, then put away the foreign gods and the Ashtaroth from among you, and direct your heart to the Lord and serve him only. And he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines." So the people of Israel put away the Baals and the Ashtaroth, and they served the Lord only. Then Samuel said, "Gather all Israel at Mizpah, and I will pray to the Lord for you." So they gathered at Mizpah and drew water and poured it out before the Lord, and fasted on that day, and said there, "We've sinned against the Lord." And Samuel judged the people of Israel at Mizpah. Now when the Philistines heard that the people of Israel had gathered at Mizpah, the lords of the Philistines went up against Israel. And when the people of Israel heard of it, they were afraid of the Philistines. And the people of Israel said to Samuel, "Don't stop crying out to the Lord our God for us, that he may save us from the hand of the Philistines." So Samuel took a nursing lamb and offered it as a whole burnt offering to the Lord. And Samuel cried out to the Lord for Israel, and the Lord answered him. As Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to attack Israel. But the Lord thundered with a mighty sound that day against the Philistines and threw them into confusion, and they were defeated before Israel. And the men of Israel went out from Mizpah and pursued the Philistines and struck them as far as below Bethkar. Then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shen and called its name Ebenezer. For he said, "Till now the Lord has helped us." So the Philistines were subdued and did not again enter the territory of Israel. And the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines all the days of Samuel. The cities that the Philistines had taken from Israel were restored to Israel, from Ekron to Gath. And Israel delivered their territory from the hand of the Philistines. There was peace also between Israel and the Amorites. Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. And he went on a circuit year by year to Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah. And he judged Israel in all these places. Then he would return to Ramah, for his home was there. And there also he judged Israel, and built there an altar for the Lord. May God add his understanding to this reading from his holy word. I've often thought that being a disciple of Jesus would be a lot easier if we could live as hermits. If we didn't have people around us, and whether it's co-workers or neighbors, annoying neighbors, that kind of grate us the wrong way. I mean, probably you've all had somebody at some point that really kind of treated you badly. And out of that, you really were tested in your faith. And it's really hard to be a saint when you have somebody who attacks you unfairly or whatever. Or even just annoying, right? And why is it that I think that we have to live our lives here instead of in some hermitage up on a mountain by ourselves? It's easier perhaps to be a saint, but God has called us to live in this world. And he called Israel to live in a place where they had neighbors who were difficult to deal with, who oppressed them from time to time, who had a better technology, and who served the other gods of the area. Now, the Philistines were a people that had likely come from Crete, and they came not that far in advance of the time that the Israelites were there, and they tried to attack Egypt, evidently, and Egypt beat them enough so that they settled in Canaan. And what we now know is that Gaza Strip, that area on the southwest area near the coast of Israel. The Philistines were people who were very willing to assimilate into the Canaanite religions and to the culture. They perhaps, if they had been near Crete, had had the gods of the Greek pantheon, I would think. But they quickly adopted the Semitic gods that were false gods. Baal, and Dagon is their favorite one, Baal's so-called father in the mythology. And they would settle in and they would serve these false idols. Israel was warned never to do that, never to assimilate, never to compromise, never to turn to the idols of the nations that they were supposed to drive out before them. But it seems to me as though God allowed the Philistines to be there periodically to put Israel in a place to test them. And perhaps you have felt tested sometimes by the people that you've worked with or that you've known that were really difficult. Discipleship is much easier in isolation, except that I have a feeling that then we'd be longing for other things. So I'm not so sure we'd be so pure. 20 years, the ark sits there in Kiriath Jearim in somebody's house, and they treat it with the honor that it finally deserves, evidently. Eliezer seems to have read the Bible, the scriptures, the Torah, the law of God, and apparently he's treating it with the honor and the respect that's due as a symbol, and it's only a symbol of God's presence. For God was not in the ark, and God was not the ark. God dwelt with his people symbolically above the ark. It was perhaps his footstool, with the angels on the top of it facing one another. Some say a throne, some say a footstool. We are tested by the things around us, by the culture around us. Jesus sent us into the world, right? With the Great Commission. Go ye therefore into all the world. Preach the gospel, make disciples of all nations, not just converts who give lip service, but truly people who want to learn the ways of God and embrace them and follow them in our life so that we can be in a deep relationship with God. It's easy to be a spectator or a fan of God without ever fully wanting to obey and serve him. When we try to go our own way, we're not all that much unlike the Philistines that were there or Israel, who was constantly tempted to turn away from God and follow the Baals and the Ashtaroth, the fertility cults of the time. And so we've come to this place where Israel's spiritual life was at a real low ebb. It was at a place where they really were not following God's ways as a people, but surely there were individuals there who continually kept the light on for God. They wanted to be in relationship with him. A good example was Samuel. And a good example besides Samuel is Samuel's parents. And surely there were many who were faithful in Israel who continued to be outraged and upset by the idolatry around them and by the things that people were doing and the injustice and the oppression. And so the people are trying to follow the gods of Canaan, the same gods in some cases, perhaps as the Philistines. And God says, I'll treat you no different if you will treat me that way, with that kind of contempt. In Amos chapter 9, verse 7, Amos comes along sometime after this, a couple of hundred years later. He writes to the Israelites at a time when justice was missing from their land, when they were doing dishonest things, they were taking bribes, they were doing things that dishonored God, and they were following idols and truly turned away from God. And Amos, speaking on God's behalf through God's voice, says, "Are you Israelites not the same to me as the Cushites?" declares the Lord. That was the father's nation that the Israelites perhaps knew at that time, Ethiopia. "Did I not bring Israel up from Egypt, and the Philistines from Caphtor, which is Crete, and the Syrians from Kir?" What's he saying, Amos, there? He's saying that God, basically, while the people were pursuing their own interests and they weren't robots, but he was still moving the Philistines into the way so that periodically they would afflict the people of Israel, and they were a test to them and a foil. And if Israel turned away from their gods and served only him, things went better, because the blessings and the curses were in force. God was in covenant with his people. So Samuel sees that they are sincere so far as it goes, right? We get this feeling, yeah, I should do more in my faith. I should turn more to God. And then we do nothing with it sometimes. At least that can be the temptation. But the love for God, the obedience for God, is a long obedience in the same direction. That's the title of a book, and I just like that, because it's not for the short term, it's for the long haul. And so Samuel sees that the problem is that their hearts are divided. Yes, they want to draw close to God because they've been following the false gods, and they're still afflicted. They're still having all their problems. They're oppressed by the Philistines. It's very possible that the Philistines don't want them to meet in large numbers, and that they have enough power to control them so that when they see them eventually at Mizpah, they decide, oh, well, we told you you can't meet. We don't know that for sure, but it's possible, one scholar says. He says, put away the Baals, put away the Ashtaroth. They were probably very fun to have around in one way, because sin can be fun. But they needed to purify themselves by getting rid of them. When it says put them away, by the way, that doesn't mean put them in the drawer so you can take them out later after you slip back into the place where you shouldn't have slipped to in the first place. It's destroy those things. The word isn't strong enough here, I think, but it's truly get rid of them, turn away from them. They will never, never fill. Now, there is an author, and I really appreciated some of her insight on this very passage. She saw that the people of Israel were treating God the way that they were treating the idols around them, too. And so she says, her name is Mary Evans, she writes, it was important for Israel to understand that their God was not under their control and could not be manipulated into doing what they wanted simply by moving the ark. She goes on, at last they realized that rather than trying to make God do what they wanted, they should mourn their own sinful behavior and seek to do what God wanted. Is the challenge for Christians living in a land of plenty that has some wonderful foundations, but it has many temptations too. And I appeal to all of us, myself included, to turn more fully to God every day and away from those other things. And to not treat God as a big genie in the lamp, right? Where we just rub it and we get our 3 wishes. That is not the kind of relationship that the God who made you wants to have with you. That would make us all users, wouldn't it? Wouldn't be much of a God who could take a bribe or be directed by us. So the point is that it's not for us to get God so much on our side as to get on God's side. To figure out what it is he wants from us and to pursue that instead of our own desires. He's a marvelous God, but he's not to be trifled with. And so I think at first it's very possible that the people are turning and they're lamenting because they know they have done wrong. They've broken the covenant. They've failed God. And so, but they're more upset about the consequences of what they're living with because of being outside of God's purpose and will for them than they are about the sincere mourning for what they've been doing. But repentance requires a kind of a remorse. It requires the ability, at least before God, to come to him and say, I need your forgiveness. What I've done or been doing is wrong. I've been following other things. I've put other things ahead of you, Lord. For the sake of popularity, I don't speak up sometimes when I could. And sometimes I begin to develop the attitudes and the opinions of the people around me that you say in your word is offensive to you. I believe that if we're truly to be disciples of Christ, of Jesus, that we should do what he says. Simple as that, right? To learn what he wants from us and has as our highest ambition for us, and to find that way, and to fit ourselves into that. And it takes a daily kind of a concentration on him, and I believe that it means we need to be together to encourage one another all the more, as Hebrews says, as you see the day approaching. Because the voices around us are telling us different things that are not necessarily lined up with God's ways. Even in our kind of our secular religion of our nation, it can be possible to worship the nation, one that I love dearly, and I'm so privileged to be a part of, rather than to thank the God who gave it to us, right? And to keep it in perspective. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God's. We pay our taxes, we live as good citizens, we know our history. I am so upset when I hear people being interviewed, some of the younger generation who know nothing of our history. They have a different history. And yes, it's got problems in it. It has people that were truly imperfect, that founded our nation, but they also had an incredible vision that I truly believe somehow God was guiding to make it possible for us to have the kinds of freedom and equality. But when we push those things to a place where they become ridiculous, it goes to seed. In the song that we sang, America the Beautiful, it talked about liberty, but liberty still with respect for the law. It talks about freedom, but that freedom still needs to be a responsible freedom. It talks about equality, but you can push that in such a way that it no longer makes sense. It's equal opportunity. Well, I'm going to get off of that for now. But the people come to the place where they realize that they've sinned against the Lord and they mean it finally. And so what do? Well, Samuel guides them through this. And so he comes and they take water, I don't know how much, and they pour it on the ground. Water was a precious resource in much of Israel, right? And so it's a acknowledgement of their need for God, and they fast. They don't eat for a while out of their remorse. And apparently there truly is a work of God's Spirit that's truly helping them to want to return to God and to follow the path of repentance. Repentance starts with that remorse. It starts with the conviction that I need to change. But it also needs to go to the next step of changing, of not continuing in the things that we know that we shouldn't be in, or developing a perspective on things that's worldly instead of godly. I truly believe that our faith, the Christian faith, the Judeo-Christian foundations of our nation are what have led to a much greater justice than there is in most parts of the world, and a much greater liberty than in other places. The understanding is that all people are created in God's image. All people that are made in God's image have worth and value. Everyone has worth to him because of the imago Dei, the image of God in which you were made. You can't be God, but you reflect him and his glory because you're made in his image. You have a conscience. You have the ability to know right from wrong. You have the ability to truly commune with other people in a deep and in an abiding way. You're built for a relationship in a way that I don't think any other creature under heaven has those abilities. And you were given a spirit with which to respond to the Spirit of God. You can invite him deeper into your life, or you can hold him out at the door. In Revelations, it says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock." There's that great painting where Jesus is standing out there knocking at the door, and there's no handle on the outside. There's only the handle on the inside. That's a symbol that we open the door for God to work deeper into our lives. Samuel sees there's a need for sacrifice. They offer the lamb, and he prays earnestly. And I believe that God would have you and me pray for our nation now. Instead of sitting there powerless and feeling angry, I keep sitting there thinking, well, what should we do? With all that's going on with this virus, with the riots that we do see, and the division, the deep division, there's something that we can do, which is to beseech God, to get on our knees and pray that he will turn things around and lead people into a relationship with him and help us to listen to one another again instead of being at one another and writing one another off or whatever we might do. Now, we see that there were the two Ebenezers, right? And then so that's coming. The first Ebenezer was when they were there and they thought, we just need to get the ark. We get the ark out here and God's going to be on our side because that symbolizes his presence. That happened a couple of chapters ago in 1 Samuel, where they're fighting the Philistines. The Philistines are in fear because they've heard of it, but the Israelites are doing the wrong thing. They haven't turned with their hearts to God. They're trying to manipulate God. And no God that's worth serving can ever be manipulated by you or me or bought. He buys us by the blood of the Lamb, but we can't buy anything of him. So the first Ebenezer was a disaster. There were 30,000 so-called soldiers might have been killed or wounded in that battle. A huge disaster. But we see that now Samuel prays for God's people, and he knows that they're changing their heart, and so he prays and God thunders. Now, in the ancient world, they understood this, that it was a battle on two planes. Yes, there was the physical battle on the ground, the actual people with the weapons that are fighting one another. But they also felt that the gods were fighting one another too, that Yahweh was in battle against Dagon. And they had already had their nose bloodied by seeing Dagon's head cut off and his hands cut off as a defeated stump laying in front of the ark, humiliated. They'd had disease from it, so they knew this is a powerful God, but they never turn to him. The Philistines don't. They don't follow the real God. They still want the one that they can manipulate, that they can control, instead of the one that wants to put us under self-control and do his bidding. So Ebenezer was a bad name, right? The first battle was a bad memory. But this time, they have it right. They've repented. They've truly meant it. They're changing their ways. They're putting away the false gods. And so God wins the victory for them. And that was one of the promises that he made that we can read right in Deuteronomy 7:23. But the Lord your God will give your enemies, basically them, but your enemies, over to you and throw them into great confusion until they're destroyed. And that's exactly what he does. He kept that promise with great thunder. So anything like that that's happening in the heavens, they understand to be that they're in trouble. This God of Israel is after them, and they run. They run in confusion. Throughout much of history, those are the way the battles have been. Confusion, and people running from the field, and a turning of the tide. I've been reading the biography of Stonewall Jackson and how many of the battles could have been won by one or the other side, but they cut away too early in confusion. Robert Bergen talks about this, about how they understood in the ancient world that there is spiritual battles going on above while there are physical battles here on earth. And I believe that's still true. Paul tells us that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers of darkness. And so I do think that sometimes there's a big spiritual battle that goes on above us, and that we, God's people, can truly come to him and plead the case and seek, as we read at the very beginning of our service, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and heal their land. And so my prayer is that God will do this great work in our land. We can't have citizenship in a fullest way in both places. We are citizens of this world, but our highest citizenship is with God. Our loyalty needs to be to always obey him no matter what. So as we think about this, I just would encourage people to truly see this whole process as repentance, confession. If there are things we need to confess where we've kind of gone on our own and decided our own thing, recommitment and God's blessing. And pray for that for our nation too, that needs God's guidance. At this time, I think more than it has in a long, long time. Amen. There's a song that I want to have played for you that it's just really lovely. It's Reba McEntire and Lauren Daigle. So